Welcome back. Now the details in full. On behalf of President Abdel Fattah el-Sisi, the Prime Minister, Dr. Mustafa Madbouli, headed to Ethiopia to lead Egypt's delegation at the 38th Ordinary Session of the African Union Summit held at the Ethiopian capital Addis Ababa, which kicked off Saturday. We have the details. The 38th Ordinary Session of the African Union Summit kicked off Saturday in the Ethiopian capital Addis Ababa. The summit is scheduled for February 15th and 16th and will be attended by many African leaders and heads of governments. Speaking at the opening ceremony, the outgoing chairman of the African Union Commission, Musa Faki Mohammed, said the U.S. proposal for what he called deportation of Palestinians from Gaza was, quote, the last straw. His remarks came days after U.S. President Donald Trump proposed moving more than 2 million people from Gaza to Jordan or Egypt to make room for real estate projects. Meanwhile, Palestinian President Mahmoud Abbas voiced his complete rejection for any attempt to impose a new U.S.-backed controversial proposal to remove more than 2 million Palestinians from Gaza and settle them elsewhere in the region, warning that efforts to forcibly remove Palestinians from their land were delusional. Palestinian President weighed the stance of the African Union and its members to support the Palestinians in defending their land. The summit addresses the crisis in Sudan and Libya and probes ways of activating joint African mechanisms on the continental and international levels. The Rafah border crossing continues to receive trucks entering into the Gaza Strip via several crossings. The trucks are carrying thousands of tons of food, humanitarian and medical aid. The Deputy Prime Minister and Minister of Health, Khaled Abdel Ghaffar, and the Minister of Social Solidarity, Maya Morsi, and a delegation from the Arab League paid a visit to Northern Sinai Governorate to follow up on the medical and humanitarian efforts to support the Palestinians. The visit included following up on receiving Palestinian injuries arriving to the Egyptian land through the Rafah border crossing to be briefed on the medical services at the hospitals, in addition to checking logistics stores affiliated to the Red Crescent, all to be briefed on the readiness to offer humanitarian aid to the Palestinians. Israeli hostages Saturday, and Israeli forces began releasing hundreds of prisoners in return in the latest indication that a fragile ceasefire that has paused fighting in the Gaza Strip but had teetered in recent days is still holding. We have the details. Israeli hostages Yair Horn, Segui Dekalchen, and Sasha Alexander Trofanov were freed in Gaza on Saturday, and Israel began releasing some 369 Palestinian prisoners and detainees in exchange after mediators helped avert a ceasefire collapse. The three Israelis were led onto a stage with the Palestinian Hamas fighters standing on each side of them at the site in Khan Yunis before they were taken into Israel by Israeli forces. Shortly afterwards, the first bus carrying freed Palestinian prisoners and detainees departed Israel's Ofer jail in the Israeli-occupied West Bank. The bus arrived in Ramallah to a cheering crowd, some waving Palestinian flags. 19 Israeli and 5 Thai hostages have been released so far, and 73 still in captivity, around half of whom have been declared dead in absentia by Israeli authorities. The swap of the 3 Israelis for the 369 Palestinians eased fears that the ceasefire agreement could collapse before the end of the 40-day first stage of a ceasefire deal in effect since January 19. Hamas had earlier threatened not to release hostages after it accused Israel of violating the terms of the ceasefire by blocking aid from entering Gaza, drawing counter threats of a resumption of fighting from Israel, which called up reservists and placed its forces on high alert. Patriots Affairs Badr Abdelati said that peace and stability in the Middle East will not be achieved unless a Palestinian independent state is established on the borders of the 14th of June 1967 with East Jerusalem as its capital. This came during his meeting with the German Member of Parliament, the deputy head of the parliamentarian bloc of Democratic and Socialist Parties Alliance, and member of the German Foreign Affairs Committees on the sidelines of the Munich Conference of Security, Johann Vadefol. In his address before the Munich Security Conference, Jordan's foreign minister said Arab countries are putting together a plan that would rebuild Gaza without displacing its people, guarantee security and governance, adding that his country could not take more Palestinians in. We have the details. Jordan's foreign minister said at the Munich Security Conference that Arab countries were putting together a plan that would rebuild Gaza without displacing its people, guarantee security and governance, adding that his country could not take more Palestinians. He warned that whilst the focus was on Gaza, there was a real danger of escalation in the Israeli-occupied West Bank. Meanwhile, the Palestinian ambassador to the UN, Riyad Mansour, stated that the Palestinians will celebrate the establishment of a Palestinian independent state. In his word, Kuwaiti ambassador to the UN, Tara El-Banai, expressed his country's full rejection to the displacement of the Palestinians. Arab countries were dismayed earlier this month after US President Donald Trump announced a plan to, quote, clean out Palestinians from Gaza and resettle most of them in Jordan and Egypt, an idea immediately rejected by Cairo and Amman and seen in most of the region as deeply destabilizing. Jordan's King Abdullah's travel to Washington on February the 11th, where he reiterated his country's steadfast position against the idea. Saudi Arabia is spearheading urgent Arab efforts to develop a plan for Gaza's future as a counter to US President Donald Trump's ambition for a Middle East Riviera cleared of its Palestinian inhabitants. Israel launched the operation after reaching a ceasefire in its war in Gaza against the Palestinian group Hamas. Thousands of Palestinians have fled their homes in the wake of the military campaign and widespread destruction. Israeli occupation forces continued their aggression on a camp for the 20th day in a row, for the 7th day as well on Nur al-Shams camp. Israeli jets through the eastern neighborhood of the city around the areas that led to huge explosions, but without causing injuries. We have more details in this report. Israeli occupation forces continued their aggression on Panorama and its camp for the 20th day in a row and on Nur al-Shams camp for the 7th day. Israeli jets through the eastern neighborhood of the city and around the areas of the camps that led to huge explosions without causing injuries. Occupation forces also beefed up with some deployments through military barricades in the western area and detained 2 Palestinians from a vehicle and also detained another young man. In the same level, the occupation forces stormed Beit Lahm city, dawn, and broke into houses of the prisoners that are awaited to be freed amongst the 6th group as part of the ceasefire deal in Gaza. Intense Israeli military raids sent Palestinians fleeing homes in the occupied West Bank, but the offensive has since expanded, threatening other houses where they sought shelter. Since it began on January 21st, the deadly Israeli offensive has gradually encroached more cities and towns. Army bulldozers have ripped through the streets, a common sight during Israeli raids, which the military says aims to clear roads of explosives. According to the UN, the military operation has killed at least 39 Palestinians and displaced over 40,000. The Israeli military said it had taken some 90 Palestinians into custody over the last week alone. Since last month, according to UN figures, nearly 18,000 people have fled the Jenin camp, normally home to 24,000 residents. With much of the camp damaged and Israeli forces still present, few Palestinian residents have been able to return.